Doctor, good morning, and thank you for being patient here and waiting for the floor. I'm very curious to hear more from you, especially knowing that there is a new president that you have now, there's a new parliament, and there's probably new agenda on foreign affairs, let's say, and also integrational processes, so please.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, and I'm very happy to be in Kyiv again, but I will need a new...
Can we have a new headset?
It doesn't work, so my Russian is very good, but not my Ukrainian. So if someone can bring this to me for later. I must say that Madam Deputy Prime Minister, whom I can't see, but I was so happy when your tone of voice changed a little toward the end, and you started to talk very frankly about the major obstacle, I think, for you and for all of us in making progress in a number of domains of cooperation, which is the situation of confrontation with Russia. And I think, there's no reason, I'm an independent scholar, there's no reason why I should not name probably the only actor in your recent history that doesn't have good intentions towards your reforms, your new government and political regime, and towards a peaceful and prosperous future for Ukraine. So I think it's always better, certainly much more comfortable for me to say what I wanted to say now that you have expressed, I guess, your sentiments and the sentiments of the government, and I think Natalia also did this. I would like to stress the few key words, it seems to me, in the problem we are facing, you are facing for the short-term future. The key words is, first is confrontation. We are in a lasting confrontation with Russia. You are in a lasting conflict with Russia. That, I believe, will remain for some time. We can discuss it later, of course, why we think it's going to last for some time. And we have to adjust to this lasting confrontation, and for you, probably to this lasting conflict in Donbass and occupation of Crimea. I fully agreed with Ambassador Mingarelli that Donbass should not be a taboo in the discussions inside Ukraine and with us. I remember last year that I was already a guest of the Institute of World Policy, and it was difficult for me to find in Kyiv people that would willingly discuss with me the situation in Donbass, the situation with displaced people, and Kyiv's policies, short-term, medium-terms, towards Donbass. I don't think that helps you not to discuss it with us, because this is what we are discussing when we, Europeans, we Americans, have to deal with the Moscow leadership, and that the first step in any negotiation with Vladimir Putin now is the situation in Donbass. The Minsk process starts with Donbass because it is meant to. So we need prozrachность, we need transparency, we need you to do not only better communication and fight the Russian narrative, you are very right, but you need to give us more information, give your own population, I guess, more information about what's going on, and also what you in the government in Kyiv intend to do, so that also we have better information when we, as mediators, European mediators, OSCE mediators, when we talk to the Moscow leadership. The other key word we heard this morning, and I can only stress it, was rule of law and judicial reform. You have the counter example, it's the Putin regime. And you have the relatively good example, which is Europe, most European societies that have a relatively efficient and honest judicial system. So you have the two examples. You know them both. I think you're in a relatively good position to know what needs to be done. Another key point, I think that was stressed by the US ambassador very rightly, is diversity. Ukraine is a very diverse country, just like France. France is probably more diverse than Ukraine in many ways. Diversity is not a problem. It's not a weakness for sovereignty or for joining a multilateral community. Or diversity just is a plus. It just needs to be accepted, respected, and managed, which I think in some ways is still lacking in Ukraine, or maybe I don't have the information about what you do to engage, all segments of society, all provinces, all parts of the country in the central project that is being thought about in Kyiv and mostly implemented by central authorities, because we are far from a system of devolution of power in Ukraine. All this said, I can only agree with all the previous speakers about the exceptional progress made in conditions of war in Eastern Europe, in Eastern Ukraine, and given also the pressure that you are under and that we as your partner are under because of Russian subversion and yes, Russian pressures on us too. Now, it seems to me that Ukraine now has a formidable window of opportunity because of Emmanuel Macron and his new government and our new parliament in France, but not only. I think there is an area of circumstances that are favorable to further EU integration for our countries and further capacity in the EU to manage more efficiently the relationship with our association partners, the Eastern Partnership countries. And by the way, because I know I will forget to ask you at the end, but I'd like to ask Madam Deputy Prime Minister, why don't you talk more about the other cases of Eastern Partnership countries and your relations with those countries like Moldova, Georgia, Belarus? I think for us, if you try to understand the problem from our point of view in Paris, Brussels, Berlin, we are engaged in this Eastern Partnership endeavor. Of course, each country is very specific, and Ukraine is our best showcase. And it is a big country at the very center of Europe, so you are very special. But I'd like to hear more about how you cooperate with the other Eastern Partnership countries. Now, why do we have a wonderful window of opportunity? At first, because the demagogues have failed in Europe. What we call populism, which really is demagoguery, they have failed. They have failed in the Netherlands elections, in the French elections. They have pre-failed in the German elections, I guess. And I would say the only Western country where that hasn't failed, the United States of America. Still, Donald Trump's presidency is not good news for the Russian leadership, and could be good news for you if you know how to work on it. Now, with Emmanuel Macron, the Franco-German tandem will, I think, find a new, even stronger momentum, although that momentum was already pretty strong with the Normandy format and the Minsk process. But both Mrs. Merkel and Mr. Macron are very committed. I can assure you that, you know, and I hope you will add to this, but it seems that the German government has made some openings to the French when it comes to the Eurozone, to economic measures at the EU level. So the momentum is there, and I see no reason why this momentum should not help Ukraine. Again, if you know how to take advantage of it. Now, what, in my view, is your major problem is insecurity. Insecurity in all definitions of the word. It's not only the military insecurity, but it's human insecurity, of course, for the people in Donbass, in Crimea, and the displaced people. But it's also insecurity, social insecurity for many millions of people in Ukraine. And there is insecurity about the future, you know, about our commitment, about the US commitment, about Russia's policy. So there is a lot that is not defined and that you have to deal with. And for this reason, I fully understand why Ukrainians, I think the majority of Ukrainians, want to belong to some bigger project or space or community of people, or community of nations. This I understand very well, that if what I call the in-between countries, which Russia calls its special sphere of interest, and what we call our eastern neighborhood or our common neighborhood, but the Russians never call it a common neighborhood. I think for those countries, as long as they do not belong one way or another to something that is bigger than their own state, insecurity is there. And this is why I do share the concern about a very long-term prospect for starting a process of belonging to the EU, even though I also fully understand the EU official position, and Ambassador Mingarelli's stated it very strongly, that it just cannot be done in a very, very, very short time. But I just wanted to stress that having studied the Soviet Union, Russia, Ukraine for many years, I think the way to independence is to belong to a project with other states. That is, one's security and sovereignty is paradoxically reinforced by joining, which is exactly the contrary of the Soviet Federation, of course. So we have to find ways of working on this project of belonging, if it's not membership in NATO, membership in the EU. And I think the moment Moscow and the ruling elites in Russia understand that you are already starting to belong, then they will feel more isolated. And then something, might happen amongst the other elites, not just the ruling elite, but the other elites in Russia, that might want to start thinking about what they can do when they have a new leadership in Moscow, and how Russia, will one day also have this wish to belong to something bigger than just the central part of Russia, and follow suit on the Ukrainian example. So I guess this is sort of rather optimistic, but it's important to look long term and not only just stick, I think, to the technical problems of the EU-Ukraine relationship, but have more of a discussion also of long-term prospects. Thank you.